Well, hello and welcome everyone to another edition of Social Media Myths Busted. I am Laura Rubinstein, your host today, and today we are here with the awesome Coach Deb Cole. Hey, Deb.
Hello, how are you, Laura?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad you were so willing to talk to me about myth busting because I know you're out there in the world seeing and hearing what people are facing when they're on digital media. And so tell us a little bit about you. What's your main focus in business with digital media, and what's your vision?
It's a good question. All good questions. This is an awesome project, Laura, because I often will get people resisting social media. A lot of business owners in the beginning, they'll resist it because of all these different myths that they've either been told or they just believe because of who they are. And I know we'll get into that in this interview. So this is a really, really good book. It's a good project for you. So I'm behind it 100%, and it's cool to be here in the same area or town as you. I think the last time we talked, I was still in Hawaii, and only being able to socialize with people via social media. So these days, I'm doing a lot more in-person events, a lot of combining the social media channels with in-person expos, and that's where we ran into each other just last week. So it just goes to show the more events you go to, the more opportunities for news blasts and press that you can get. So it's cool to be here. Yeah.
So glad to have you here. I know you've had an extensive journey in social media, no matter where you are in the world. That's the cool thing. And but it's always great to connect in person. I agree. But tell
Yeah.
us about your journey on social media. Did you love it or hate it initially? How did you even come to it?
Yeah, I, believe it or not, wasn't a fan of Twitter at first. I resisted going onto Facebook. Believe it or not, I had a transition where I was still on Myspace for the longest time before I finally embraced Facebook. Like I set up a Facebook page, but didn't really actively get on it. And I think a lot of it was because I still had a lot of really good clients and referrals and friends on Myspace. So I was getting business. And I think it doesn't matter what social network channel you use, when you're getting a reward, when you're getting reinforced by using a specific channel, you'll continue to use that channel. And there are still times I go back there when there are specific reasons to go back there for clients. Now, it may not be for 6 months or it may not be a year, but there are certain clientele that use MySpace still predominantly over Facebook or any of the other channels. But yeah, even though I was an early adopter, and you and I were back there back 7, 8, 9 years ago with our podcasts and our blogs and our Twitter handles, I still went through the same thing everyone else did, and I resisted it at first. So yeah.
I had no idea that you were an advocate for MySpace and that it's still
Huge.
a viable place. So just give us a little insight into MySpace. What's going on now? Because it seemed like it just completely died, but who is it right for?
Well, it's funny because it's embarrassing when just recently Bob the teacher, he was one of my first clients it's probably about 10 years ago, and he found some stupid app that pulls in your first tweet, and he shares it on my Facebook wall, and it's all about how I'm creating how-to MySpace videos. So it's a bit of an embarrassment that, it's like all this MySpace talk, but I will say from stage to business owners that are in the audience that to not ignore some of these social networks that everyone else is, if you want to be where, so in other words, everyone is on Facebook, right? So naturally you want to be on Facebook. So I'm a huge advocate of now, I'm a huge user of it. I would say I'm a Facebook addict. But at the same time, there are businesses like musicians and the Spanish culture. That's the demographic that is a high user base of MySpace, and especially, again, musicians. So when I lived in Austin for about a year and a half, I would set up MySpace accounts for my clients because they were musicians, right? Austin's the live music band capital of the world, right? So obviously you're going to get a lot of those types of clients. So we found that their audience was there, and it's because MySpace was originally created for distribution in audio. So you would have a song, and instead of relying on the record labels to approve you and then get your record out, and I'm using record in a symbolic term because I realize it's not really records anymore, but they no longer had to rely on that. And that's why MySpace was huge in the media revolution. They were really the first to be out there and providing a channel and a tool for people, business owners, musicians, and anybody that had a voice to get their voice out there, because you could upload your MP3s, you can upload your albums. Again, I'm using this as a symbolic word. Out there. And that's what the media revolution is about. And you asked what my vision is, and it's that right there, is to get these tools, this technology into as many hands of business owners and companies that can use them, so that way they don't have to rely on the media elite to get them publicity, or the, say, TV Hollywood elite to get their brand out. And there's a lot of stars out there, and we're seeing that with traditional TV shows like The Voice and America's Got Talent. You know, all of those types of shows show us that there's a lot of people with a voice that don't necessarily get an album with the traditional Hollywood or record labels.
That's awesome. That's the whole thing about social media. It has leveled the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm writing the book, because so many people are buying into these myths and they're missing out on this huge opportunity.
Yes.
So tell us what ways social media and digital media has helped your success. Maybe you have some stories that you can share.
Oh, tremendously. Again, I was in Hawaii for 7.5 years, and the whole reason I used it, and I was an addict. I mean, I had a video that's still out there, I think it has 50,000 views, about I was on the beach, and it was Twitterholic, and it was all about when my battery died, and I was freaking out on the beach of Hawaii, you know, where you should just be chilling out. But I was freaking. My battery, I didn't have it. It was the original iPhone titanium. I wish I had it in my office right here to show it to you. I still have it. It's in a box somewhere. But I was freaking out because the battery died, and then I lost internet connection. So my partner at the time had a video camera, and he filmed it, and we did a little bit of a spoof of someone who's just like real chill, you know. So I start on the beach, I start on this cool rock and talk about how great Hawaii is and how I'm enjoying it, my day. But then halfway through, I just start freaking out because I lost battery. So I was a heavy user of social media when I was on the island, because that was my access to the outside world, right? I could either spend an hour getting ready, driving to a networking event, 2 hours at the networking event, and then a half hour to an hour to go home. And I looked at that as a huge time suck, right? It was a good 4 hours for any type of in-person networking event. And while those were important, they were limited on the rock. So a myth, I didn't even think about this until just now, but one of the myths has been social media takes too much time. And who has time for that? And I thought, gee, if you break down in-person networking events, there's all of this prep time that you still have to invest to maybe meet 1, 2, or 3 people. Now, those 1, 2, or 3 people might be pivotal. You might get a client out of it. But imagine if you could meet those 1, 2, or 3 people, get a client, and then have hundreds and thousands of people eavesdropping in your conversation, and you get all these additional clients, dozens and dozens more clients, dozens and more fans, dozens and more likes these days. That's what's important, getting likes, getting shares, getting retweets. So that's what's powerful about social media, is that it's exponentially bigger than one-on-one conversations. Those one-on-one conversations are critical, but even better to get those where they could be spread across the net.
So let's say that people get in, they realize, okay, I'm sold. I'm going to be networking online now. And I want to use it as a business. Yeah, but what do I need? How will I know what I'm doing, if I'm doing it right? What should I measure? What myths do you think people buy into with regard to what they need to look for?
Yeah, and that's it's one of the things that a lot of people will talk about, and I get resistance when I go into a company, is that how do you measure ROI? You can't really, social ROI. You can't really measure social media. And I had a radio producer talk to me recently, and he's like, well, this podcasting thing is great, but you don't have the Nielsen rating, and you don't have people measuring it like you do on TV and radio, and it's total bollocks. Like, it's just wrong, especially since Nielsen rating is typically only the main major networks like NBC, ABC, and then the major radio stations. Otherwise, these small mom and pop cable stations on your TV channel, they don't have a measurement. They quote how many homes they're into, but they can't tell you specifically who's listening. So my argument to that myth, and we bust it by saying, here, look at YouTube. Here's how many people viewed it specifically. Here's here's how many people downloaded the iTunes podcast. Here's how many people shared this update on Facebook or on Twitter, how many people retweeted. So we can specifically measure those things now to the T, like exactly, as opposed to just saying, oh, we're in 30 million homes. Yeah, you're in 30 million homes, but who's really listening? That's more important. That's more important to know who viewed your video and then who listened to your podcast than just saying, well, this podcast is out there. That's not really ROI at all, but that's traditional radio broadcasting. That's traditional airtime sales for sponsors to get behind these radio producers and stations and TV stations on cable. But quite frankly, the ROI is much easier and more accurately measured on social media. If you go into Facebook, there's this Insights tab now, and they change it all the time. They call it something different. They move it all around. Drives me crazy. Same thing like Google Hangouts. Like every time I come in here to do a Hangout, something's different, right? So the one thing that you need to embrace is that everything changes in social media, including the social network channels. So just embrace that change will happen, and the quicker you can adapt and adopt those changes and then adapt to them with your business, you'll be the one that owns the results in your industry. And your competitors will be like, I can't keep up. Well, you can, because you'll make a commitment to adopting change. And I think that's the biggest thing I get into, Laura, with coaching clients, is that it's a mindset, right? It's a mindset of adopting change. And if you can adopt it quicker than your competitors, you will own the market share in attention. And that's really all social media is. It's attention and being top of mind.
And the good news is, for those clients who are saying that, their competitors are probably saying that too. So they have a good chance that if they adopt it quicker, like you're saying, and adapt it and adopt it, I love that,
yeah.
that they'll be in the forefront of their market. So like you said, and it doesn't take rocket science. I think there's a big myth out there of it's hard to embrace that change and quickly adapt to it. So can you give some tips for doing that?
Yeah, and one, or actually two specific myths I hear all the time, and it's a major resistance point, and it's a resistance to anything change, but specifically social media. I'm too old and I'm not techie. Those are the two myths that you can just throw out the window. I try to hide, how old you are, but, like I was around when they had corded phones and the phone in Wall Street was this big and it was a mobile phone, and I resisted. I had like one of the first beepers at work. I'm not techie. I'm not this young, 16-something that grew up on social media and iPads and, this whole swipe technology. That's all new for me. But what I found, Laura, is that anytime I resisted something or got nervous about adopting things like blogging or anything that was technical, right, and you had to use HTML for it, I found if I was resistant to it, that meant my other competitors were resisting to it too. And I made a commitment very early on, and I was fortunate to have hired a coach and to help me break through those barriers. And I made a commitment very early on with my coach to make sure that anytime I would resist, that she would push me further and say, I hear resistance, Coach Deb, so you need to blast through that. And within 30 days, I would adopt it. I would just be a user of it. And it's interesting because within 30 days, you adapt to it, including, Laura, my Mac. I was a heavy PC advocate. I loved the PC. And I got a Mac. And when I first got my Mac, I had my Mac over here, and I would turn it on every morning. But I also had this big, clunky PC that had this fan that would word all day, and I would turn that on as well every day for 30 days until I realized I no longer was using my PC, but I kept turning it on because it was this comfort. I thought I still needed it, and I still did some editing on videos because I used Vegas Studio Editor. So that's about the only thing I wound up using my PC for at the time. But I realized it took 30 days till finally that comfort level of even having the PC on, I just didn't need it. And I no longer even turned it on, to the point where, Laura, when I moved from Austin, Texas, I wound up subletting one of my lease apartments where I had office equipment, and I still had the PC, that huge, remember when it had the huge server, right? That Word, with the fan. I literally left it with the person and sold it because you don't need it anymore. You just need the laptop, or you just need the drive. Actually, this is what I use these days to save all of my files. I have to actually pick up the laptop so you can see it because it's attached to the MacBook Pro. But this is what I use right now, which is it's 2 terabytes, and that's it. It's as small as this. And once you realize that you adapt to what's new and cutting edge, your life is a lot lighter and it's more simpler. And when you do move, you're not moving clunky things. So again, my commitment was adopt to it quicker, even if I felt a little resistance, and you'll be light years ahead of your competition because they'll just still be stuck, like frozen, resisting the change.
I love that. I'm so inspired by you. You and I at this point probably take for granted that we can adapt pretty quickly.
Yes.
But just to hear that your transition on from the PC to Mac, I'm still on PC, and I probably will stay on PC for a while. But I definitely am Mac friendly. I've
Hmm.
got my little iPhone, and I take the best of both worlds. But what's
Right.
inspiring to me about what you're saying is that what I'm not hearing is like, but I don't know how to do it. Well, yeah, you didn't know how, but you took 30 days and you
Yep.
opened yourself up to learning how. And this isn't rocket science. You don't have to go get a PhD. If you
Right.
can, I like to say, if you can click a mouse, you can do this.
Yes. And speaking of technology, I'm going to have to walk away for a second and go get a battery to plug in because I realized I was not using my battery right now for the laptop. But, I look at adopting technology to when I worked out, again, back in the 80s, and aerobics classes were huge, right? Now I'm dating myself, I realize this, but that's fine. Um, I had to realize, and this is a huge epiphany for me, Laura, and I think it's translated into business when I got into my career later on, especially in the tech industry, is I realized that when I went to these aerobics class, I would sit in the back and I would sit way far away where no one could see me. I'm like, I'm gonna do this, but it's like, okay, back and forth, but nobody's gonna notice. And I was just uncoordinated. I looked like I wasn't catching on. And I made this decision that I had to look like a fool until I mastered this. So I went up to the front of the class. I stood right behind the instructor. So it was the instructor, me right behind, and then the entire class behind me. And I had to be willing to look like a fool for a few classes until I got those moves down. And once I did, though, I was like, oh, this isn't that hard, but I had to see it modeled to me in front of me. And then I just modeled after her. Whatever she did, when she went to the right, I went to the right. When her feet went to the left, I went to the left. And I just modeled it. And I found that was a far quicker way than trying to hide out in the back if I was ever going to really learn it. So that's what I would encourage to your listeners, your viewers, and your readers, because I realize this will be a multimedia format with this knowledge. But be willing to look like a fool, be willing to be a little uncomfortable so that you can embrace it, and then you'll have mastered it again before your competitors. And I'll let you tell a story while I go get my battery. I'll be right back.
Okay, great. So I love that if you change your mindset, you really are able to shift your whole energy around results. And I think if you're not getting anything else out of what Coach Deb is saying, it's that your mindset matters. Number one. Number two, get techie. I've heard Coach Deb say, I'm a geek girl. So you and yet you hear her saying, no, I'm not a geek girl, I'm someone who has just forced myself to adapt to it. So kudos to you, Deb. Kudos to you, Miss Deb, because you have become a geek girl even though that's not your tendency, right?
It's not at all. It is
Yeah.
not at all. And I've taken assessments, personality assessments, and I'm meant to be social. I'm the social butterfly. I took that Fascinate assessment. I don't know if you've ever read that
I
book,
have.
but by Sally, and it was the maestro. It was the one kind of more behind the scenes, making things happen. Coordinating speakers at events, things like that. I love that, and I love more the social aspect. If I never had to be in front of a computer, I'd be happy. I'd be perfectly happy just being with people, selling face to face and networking face to face and doing PR. With people. I'm an extreme extrovert. I do not like spending the day in front of my computer all day, but it's necessary. And I think that's why I like social media, is because while I can do things technical on the computer, I get that outlet and I get my social fix. Every hour I'll do something project-based, and then I'll go on Twitter and Facebook and see what my friends are doing. So it's a nice outlet. But I'm not a techie engineer by trade. I studied psychology. I was a social worker, in the first decade of my career, And so from social worker to social networking, a little different, but it's again all dealing with with people and human behavior.
Yeah, from social network worker to social networker. I love it.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm seeing this. It's on this side here. The printer behind me. That's not even plugged in. I haven't used it. I set it up when I moved here about a year and a half ago. Never used it. Never used it. It's like these things in technology these days, because now everything can be done on your phone. I have the scan app, and now anytime somebody wants something printed or whatever, I just take a picture of it, I scan it, and then I email it. So what's awesome about technology changing is we're becoming less reliant on techie type of things and equipment, and everything can be done on a small of a device as this. Like, this is what these huge computers used to be back in the 70s, before PCs were being sold to the general public, the personal computer. I watched the Steve Jobs movie recently and read the book, and it's like, that's true. It was sold as a personal computer for you. And I still remember the resistance of people, family and friends are like, what do you need a computer for,
Yeah.
And the New York accent comes around because that's what, that was the resistance. Like, what do you need a computer for? Like, yeah, but what do you need that for? And eventually they adapted, and one of my relatives got into real estate and they're like, this is the best thing ever. So again, we can't prevent the future from happening. So if we want to be ahead of the curve, we just need to adopt these social media changes quicker, sooner than later. And your book about busting myths will help people do that, because the sooner you could blast through the myth of you're too old, or you're not techie enough, or you can't measure ROI, then the sooner you'll get business. And one other myth, Laura, I want to bring up for your book is the myth of people thinking that they can just rely on social media to get business and grow their business exponentially, because I would be lying to people if I said that's all I use. It's not. Yeah, I'm a social media fan, wrote the first book on Twitter. Like, that's what I'm known for. I was the Twitter queen when it wasn't a good term. Like, it was a derogatory term. Like, oh, she's a Twitter queen. Now it's like a badge of honor. It wasn't at first, but I'm not just on social media. And when I consult with clients, I don't just talk about social media. We look at everything marketing related. And if people don't go to expos and go to conferences and go to events, meet people face to face, you lose the power of what you get in social networks. When we're using the social networks, is to get to know people before an event, and then continue to nourish the relationship after the event, after you meet people IRL, in real life, right? It's a huge term. It's like, what's this IRL stuff? Oh, it's in real life. So when we meet people at an expo, at an event, that's when they get to really bond with you, know, like, and trust you, and that's when business comes quicker, because they see you top of mind in social networks. Laura, I've met people 2 years ago at a networking event at an expo. It was actually at the New Media Expo, and 2 years later they became a client simply because I was top of mind for them in Twitter and in Facebook. They kept seeing me in the newsfeed, and they're like, I'm about to blow up my brand. You can help me do that. I want to hire you. 2 years later, right?
Right.
But that's, I'm not here and then gone. Like, I'm in it for the long haul. This is my business. This is my career. So if I meet people today, I do business a year from now, 6 months from now, or next month, it doesn't matter. It's a cyclical thing with business. And all of a sudden you realize marketing is much simpler, and it's all because you adopted social media and the practices, busted the myths that are out there that your competitors they're going to hold on to it. And I love knowing that. Like, I love when there's a myth out there or a challenge out there, because that means my clients can blast through that. And if success was easy, everyone would do that, right? It would be easy to get to the top for everyone. It isn't. It's for the people who are willing to push through and persevere and learn fast and adopt things faster than people who will keep that resistant and hold on to that belief system as though it's fact.
Yeah. You are so inspiring. Because I just want to, say yeah, yeah, yeah. And like there's another myth you alluded to in there, that social media is not one and done. It's not a one-way kind of communication and then you can
Right.
get out of there, or like pay for a commercial and then you're done. It's a
Yeah.
long-term relationship. Like you said, you're getting clients 2 and 3 and whatever years later,
Right.
because you're there consistently. You have a love for it. You've adopted it and you keep adapting and adopting.
Right.
And do you have any stories maybe of client examples of how someone went from not on social media to being on social media and then, made a big impact for their business?
Oh, multiple stories. The first one I think of is a dermatologist when they were a cosmetic dermatologist, and one of their belief systems was that people didn't want to share, their secret, right? And but it's in California, and having a cosmetic surgeon or whatever is kind of like the badge of a shrink. Like on the East Coast, people don't admit they go to a psychologist. They would never admit they got work done, and it's probably more rare on the East Coast than it is on the West Coast. So, but he still had that belief system that no one was going to want to share. They weren't going to check in to the doctor's office that they're getting a nose job or they're getting age spots removed or whatever. But he specialized in laser therapy, hair removal, and that was something that like we could get in the door where it was like, hey, this is the coolest way to never have to shave again, and people would use it as kind of a bragging right, like, hey, I just went to this doctor and da 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 da, and they would check in, and then the Yelp reviews that he saw was huge because that's again another way of social media. If you don't have your site listed or if you don't have a Twitter account, no one can retweet you or reference you and say, oh yeah, go meet this doctor. He's awesome at hair removal. He's the best in the country. And then it was just like facial rejuvenation. It wasn't even surgery. It was just these facials and this treatment that he had that he adopted to. But he and his whole, I guess less him than his team were very resistant to it. But once they started seeing results, once they started getting clients in there, once they started seeing, wow, this really works, and they saw that it was word of mouth on steroids, because their friends would text their friends on their phone and say, hey, I'm at the so-and-so doctor's office, this is great, and they would take like a selfie and be like, look at what, first they'd show the example of like them all red-faced, and then they'd show, the next day, or they'd post this on Facebook. So he found that people were willing to do this and were willing to share, and again, especially in California, where I think it's things that women brag about. I come from the East Coast, so it's like you just don't do those things, right?
Right.
So we both kind of had to get through like resistance in that they would share it. So he had other myths and other kind of resistance beyond the traditional resistance of social media. The donut bar guy that I think you met at the recent social media day in San Diego, like all he does is organic social media to get the word out of his donut bar. It's the best in the country. USA Today gave them best donut bar. And I asked him, like, what do you do to advertise specifically paid? And he says nothing. Everything is all social media and viral. So if you could do it with donuts, if you can do it with a cosmetic surgeon, you can do it with any business whatsoever. There's not one. I would say maybe the only business that I've ever resisted taking on as a client is someone who had a treatment center, and it was, for people and it's more anonymous, right? I'm like, you can't really do anything if their treatment is anonymous. Like that's the only place if you don't want to get out there and known, like obviously, and that's about the only exception that I would say that should not be on social media.
If you don't want to get known, then don't go
Yeah,
on social media. That's funny.
right,
I think
right.
the moral of the story is you got to know your market, and if you're not quite sure about your market, test it.
Yeah,
Like
yes,
the dermatologist thought he knew his market, like nobody wants to share, and maybe on the East
yeah,
Coast, yeah. But what would a dermatologist do on the East Coast? They're going to have to know what their market would be willing to share, and maybe
yeah,
it's after, not befores, but afters, or
right,
maybe it's just endorsements of like, I heard this guy's a good one, and maybe it's more informational and content than it's, hey,
yeah.
look what I got done.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
And like that was one of those examples that, the client is giving me some of these resistance points and myths, and I'm like, kind of believe you, right? But let's try it. And we did. And it was fantastic. Yeah, it was, and it surprised me a little bit. I was like, oh, yay. I had originally, I remember, I gave him a discount. We did a little barter. I was like, yeah, who doesn't want laser, right? That I'll never have to shave again for summer. Yeah, awesome. So I did that because I was kind of believing into like, oh, this might be a little challenging, and we very quickly found that it was a fantastic business to have on social media. Again, especially for people who have, say, these private social networks, because you and I have our Facebook open to the world, right? Like when we share something, I think you're the same as me. I don't hide that. It's not just for my clients to see, and the only people that can't comment is if they're not friends or friends of friends, right? But if your friend wanted to comment on mine, even if we weren't friends, they could still comment because you're that trusted endorsement. But a lot of people have private Facebook pages that you don't see anything other than their name on Facebook and a picture, and you don't see a post until you're friends with them. So those are types of people that they really do use it as a personal network to share the things that they're going to, anything from their mechanics to their doctors, dentists. Recently I saw someone had busted a tooth, and it was over a holiday weekend, and they were just bragging and being very thankful to their dentist because they were able to fix that tooth very quickly. And when we're appreciative, we want to share that. You know, it's just like we'll tell a friend of something that's really good. Well, now we have the ability to do that on steroids. It's word of mouth on steroids. That's all social media is, in my opinion. It's
Totally.
something I would call you up, Laura, and tell you about, but now I tell you about it on my wall, and everybody else sees it. You know,
Yeah.
thousands of people at once.
Now, a lot of people talk about how much time it takes. And so when you're talking to a client and trying to convince them that this is going to be great, how much time do you prepare them to take?
That's a very good question. I highly recommend people get a social media manager, and you can get anyone from $2.50 in the Philippines or India, speak very good English. They know about social media. There's firms that specifically do that, to $10 an hour in states in the U.S. where the cost of living is low. Like, it's not that expensive to have someone to help out. And then the other thing, in the instance of attorneys or doctors, they typically have an assistant or a secretary that's already there fielding appointments, say, for them. And then there's a lot of downtime for those people, right? So those are people that can do social media and all the activities while there's downtime. And they could literally be on every hour on the hour for 5 minutes, and that's all they would need to do to just get out there, engage a little bit, tweet about some things, retweet other people, and that keeps them top of mind. And that's the biggest thing that you want to think about social media is it's PR, and anyone in the PR industry will tell you all that means is making sure that when a client needs your services, they think of you first because you're top of mind. You're the one that they saw last or they ran into a week ago or a month ago, and they're like, oh yeah, I need that service. I'm going to call Laura for that. So yeah,
Yeah,
did I
so
answer your question?
oh yeah.
Okay.
So if they're strategic about how they use their time, I mean, if you're taking 5 minutes every hour, 8 hours a day, I mean, it's
Yeah.
40 minutes. It's not,
Yep. Yeah.
uh, it
Yeah.
really doesn't have to be that much.
Right. And if you hire someone to do it, I'd say, start at 2 hours a day. 2 hours a day, Monday through Friday. What I like is that these are people you can hire virtually. So they could be college students, they could be interns, they could be, what I love is these moms who have a lot of experience in the career world, but they've just had a baby and they do not want to go into an office, and they want something on the side to do in between, taking care of their new child, right? So you wind up getting an incredibly talented person to work for you, and it's not what they used to make, but they don't care because they've got the lifestyle and they're getting their needs met by being with their child. So you're getting a very, very highly qualified person to work for you, again, for $10, $20 an hour. Sometimes $30 an hour, depending on what their skill set is. If they're coming with marketing background and strategies for you, then you're going to want to expect to pay $30 an hour. If they're just doing the work that anyone can do, that you give them the strategy, then you could hire anyone from $10, $15 an hour, again, in America. So, because I'll get that resistance a lot too, is, well, I don't want to hire someone in the Philippines or India. I want someone on our time zone that speaks our language and understands our culture. And you can get that. Again, it's not that expensive either.
Yeah, it's great. It's all about planning and prepping and thinking through the strategy.
Yes.
So what advice do you have for people who are now willing to step in, play a larger game on social media to get out there?
So get a strategy. Don't just go in there and say, I'm going to be on social media. Plan it out just like you would a business plan, just like you would your marketing plan, except now it's a social media marketing plan. Hire a consultant that's going to walk you through exponentially. It's why we have been coaches for the longest time, because we've hired coaches so that we can skip through the trial and error, avoid those pitfalls, and go full speed ahead. I'm a racer in my spare time as a hobby. It's one of the things I like to do. And one of the things that I did when I first got on the track, Laura, is I got a coach to sit beside me. I had the helmet on. I had a headset where he would talk to me, and I sat down and I said to him, and I'm like, listen, yeah, I race on the streets, but it's not the same. Like, I've never been on a professional race course. I'm a total amateur, so I want you to tell me what to do. every moment, every corner, every straightaway. Tell me what to do. Tell me if I'm doing something wrong. Correct me. I have thick skin. I'm from the East Coast. Be direct with me and just tell me. And as a result, he loved it because he's like, this is the ideal student, right? As coaches, we just want someone to be like, hey, listen, just correct me all the way along the way. And we would get out of the car, and this is at least 7 laps around the track. And then because he was also a friend of mine as my coach, he would also go in and talk to the other coaches, and they would just kvetch about their client there that was sitting as a racer. And one guy told his coach not to correct anything or talk to me until the end of the course. And I'm like, that's literally hundreds of mistakes that you could be getting. There were about 36 possible turns that if you did them wrong, you literally were learning them wrong and putting it into your memory. So then you've got the muscle memory as you're going through corners. And if you're doing it wrong and you don't get corrected immediately, the next time you go around the corner, what are you going to do? You can do it the same exact way you did it last time because you didn't know it's wrong. So where he would literally, I gave him permission to take the wheel as well. So I would have I'd be holding onto the wheel, and he would come in and grab it. And I still remember one time, Laura, scared the living crap out of me. He's like, no, turn it. And I'm like, turn it a bit. And he's like, no, like this, into the wall, right? So we're taking this corner, and we're literally facing the wall, and then we turn like immediately right after that. And it was freaky because I'm facing a wall and thinking, oh my God, this has got to, put on the brakes. But it was the line that we needed to take to get the fastest way around that corner and beat the guy in front of me. So what happened is, because I took that corner well, the next straightaway was this very long straightaway. And because we mastered that corner, what he taught me is one very, very pivotal, it was probably the most important lesson of that race, is that when the most important corner is the one right before the longest straightaway, because when you get that momentum in racing, that 1 millisecond turns into multiple seconds. It's like 5-second advantage. And there was a Porsche that technically his car was faster than me. His turning capacity was better. I was driving an M3 at the time, so he could turn faster and he had more horsepower to get the speed and momentum. But I was able to pass and fly past this Porsche because I mastered that corner because of what my coach taught me. And it was just these little tricks and tips of what I need to do. And I flew past this Porsche, and I think the most fun for me was getting him to, shake my hand at the end. He's like, you're a really good racer, Deb. At first I didn't think, oh, some girl's on the course, she's going to hold us up and slow us all down. He's like, you're a really good racer. And it was only because my coach taught me what to do and I listened. So it's the same thing in social media. We may tell you something that you may get a little nervous for. You're like, what? Why would I do that? Trust a social media consultant that's been there before you, and then do it, and do it faster, and listen to people's advice. Get all the books you can possibly get of experts that have gotten results for their clients. That's how you'll get faster, and you'll whip by your competitor that technically has a bigger budget, that's been around longer, again, like this Porsche, right? You'll fly past it because you're doing the things right. They're just doing it willy-nilly. So have a strategy, listen to your coach, map it out, and then as you go through the course, adjust anything that needs to be adjusted. Tweak it. Look at the results that you get when you test social media. There's plenty of ROI. You can look at that with your insights in Facebook. It'll tell you what posts get the most views, what get the most shares, and then you just repeat. It's like, washing your hair. It's wash, rinse, repeat, right? It's the same thing with social media. Repeat the things that work.
Awesome. Yes, I concur. It's awesome. You rock. How can people find you and stay in touch?
They can find me everywhere on social media networks at Coach Deb, and CoachDeb.tv is I'll put that up on the screen because we get to do that now with our lower thirds, right? Yeah. CoachDeb.tv is the newest, latest blog that I've had, that I update all the news interviews that I go on when they give me footage, and when we share about social media tips on the radio or on TV, they give me the footage and I upload it there. I'm a little behind at uploading it because it's like the plumber, it's the leaky plumbing because they're taking care of other clients. But I'll be uploading a plethora of other videos that we've done over the past year. So yeah, CoachDeb.tv is the best place to go. Follow me, find those videos, watch them, because you're getting free social media advice that other people are paying thousands of dollars for. So go grab those to at least get a starter, and then take it to the next level. Hire a coach, hire someone that can can really accelerate your growth and beat your competitors there because you're doing it first.
Yeah, bust those myths and beat your competitors. I love it. So it's always a pleasure connecting with you and myth busting with you and meeting of the minds. We'll do this more often for sure. So thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura.